Hello class, Mr. Young here with Lesson 2, Chapter 23. This one is called Imperialism in the Pacific. Now, as the title of the lesson implies, we're covering the Pacific today. How did we end up with a state in the middle Pacific? What about Samoa? When did Japan become involved? These are all questions that we're going to answer today. There we go. Alright, so by the mid-1800s, the U.S. had its eye on the Pacific. So we're talking like Civil War time here. In 1867, the U.S. had actually acquired the Midway Islands, but they were very small. And they were a good short stop, but not a very strong base. Like, they weren't going to rule the Pacific from the Midway Islands. Also, there's that problem of them being a whopping 3,000 miles from the coast of California. See these little tiny specks there? Halfway between Asia and North America, that's Midway. Now, the Hawaiian Islands are about 2,000 miles off the coast of California, and a little larger. Americans and Hawaiians started trading with each other all the way back in the 1790s. Around 1800, Christian missionaries began to move in, and then it didn't take long for merchants and whalers and that like to start inhabiting the islands as well. In the 1830s, the sugarcane plantations started showing up, and soon American planters and businessmen basically took control of much of the Hawaiian Islands. In 1891, Queen, I want to say this right, Lele'Awokenia, we'll call her the Queen, she becomes the ruler of Hawaii. And she wants Native Hawaiians to own the land of Hawaii again, which seems pretty reasonable. The American planters that had basically taken control of the island weren't going to allow that to happen, and so they removed her from power and set up their own provisional government. A provisional government is a fancy word for temporary government. That was 1893. Now, this provisional government asked the USA to annex Hawaii, making it a U.S. territory. Now, most Native Hawaiians, of course, didn't want annexation. They liked being their own country and owning their own land. The Queen went to Congress and told them, hey, we don't really want this. Me and my people don't want to be part of the United States. President Benjamin Harrison actually really didn't listen to her and signed an annexation treaty, but the Senate would not approve it, so it died on the table when Harrison left office. The next president, Grover Cleveland, thought that the whole American takeover of Hawaii was like a travesty, so the provisional government of Hawaii, set up by those planters, basically waited it out until President McKinley took office, and then they tried again, and then Hawaii was finally annexed in the year 1900, becoming U.S. territory. Now, what about the Samoan Islands? The Samoan Islands are 3,000 miles south of Hawaii, so they're way out there. The Samoans were nice enough to allow the USA to build a naval station on the island of Pago Pago. They also granted special trading rights to the United States, as well as Great Britain and Germany. Without really letting the Samoans in on it, the three nations, Great Britain, the United States, and Germany, met and decided to kind of split the Samoan Islands up between the three of them, and too bad to the Samoans. Britain later actually pulled out in exchange for more islands elsewhere, and so the U.S. had control of a large chunk of Samoa. Now, over in China, China was like the great prize of the Pacific. Each island the U.S. gained in the Pacific was a stepping stone to the gem of the East. China had been carved up by the imperial powers of Europe into what's called spheres of influence, which is kind of like, all right, this is your part of China, this is our part of China, this is their part of China, and only we're allowed to sort of settle and subjugate the people and trade in these ports. Just us. They're like exclusive zones for each country in China. The U.S. didn't have a sphere of influence in China, and this very much worried them. So they proposed to the imperialist nations in China an open-door policy, basically saying, hey guys, let's drop these exclusive natured spheres of influence and just let everyone trade everywhere in China. Why wouldn't we do that? Kind of like a kid at the bottom of a tree and all his friends are up in the treehouse and they won't let him in, except the little kid is the United States and that treehouse is China and all the people up in it are like, the United Kingdom and France and places like that. So the imperialist powers said, no way. They liked their grip on their little chunk of China. That is until the Boxer Rebellion. See, in 1899, a secret society of Chinese folk within China started killing all the foreigners. They didn't like the foreigners controlling everything. They were called the Righteous and Harmonious Fists, which sounds way cooler than what the Europeans called them, which was Boxers, hence the name the Boxer Rebellion. A coalition of foreign troops came to put down the Boxer Rebellion, and then after that the USA was all like, hey you guys, see what happens when you don't respect China's sovereignty? Now let's knock it off with these spheres of influence and just let everyone trade. Let's be cool, man. And that's, kind of what happened, except China was still mostly just taken over by foreign powers. But now the spheres of influence were gone and everyone could do everything everywhere. Alright. The Boxer Rebellion is pretty interesting. Alright, in the early 1900s, let's talk about Japan. Japan was its own rising power, and they had their eyes on a part of China known as Manchuria. Unfortunately for them, so did the Russians, and you ended up having them fight over this resource-rich chunk of China in the Russo-Japanese War of 1904. President Roosevelt was actually able to get the Japanese and Russians to meet and agree to stop fighting with the Treaty of Portsmouth. That was 1905, but tensions in the region, really the Pacific, would remain high as Japan grew to challenge even U.S. influence within the region. They were a growing power. It's all going to kind of culminate in World War II. Now, relations between Japan and the United States continued the downward slide. In 1906, the Asian population of California, specifically I believe San Francisco, was subjected to segregation laws much like that of African Americans in the South. Japan was pretty ticked off at this. So Roosevelt went over and talked to them and ended up working out that gentleman's agreement that we had kind of talked about earlier. Basically, Asian segregation would be ended in exchange for the agreement from Japan to limit the migration of their folk into the United States. Japan really didn't like this because their people never should have been segregated in the first place. Now they have to give up something to make something that shouldn't have happened not happen. Tensions generally remained high even after the gentleman's agreement. Some Americans wanted war with Japan, but Roosevelt really didn't want a part of that mess. And so instead he sent the Great White Fleet. It's painted white. It's not a race thing. Painted white. He sent this fleet of 16 ships around the world on cruise to sort of show everyone our power, and it kind of intimidated Japan, and by 1909 a lot of the issues that had been causing tension had been resolved, at least for now. That's the end of the lesson for today. On the next page you have a short 5-point quiz, and we're going to call it there. Have a wonderful day and let me know if you need anything.